I do want to talk about my overall experience there. Being live, being in the crowd, being in that atmosphere. It was getting kind of bleak there for a minute. Because just a couple of days ago, the tickets were not selling very well. Which is telling. Unlike other cities, Houston, Texas in general, is a massive market for wrestling. Most of the best wrestling fans, no offense to Chicago or New York, Brooklyn, Seattle, Philadelphia, and the UK, of course. Texas has a long history, a long legacy of wrestling legends. And I'm not just talking about the Von Erichs. I'm not just talking about Dusty Rhodes. I'm talking about Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Undertaker, Shawn Michaels, Eddie Guerrero, freaking Mark Henry came from here, freaking Booker T. Can you dig it, sucker? This is a state that has wrestling all over it. It is in its roots. And they were struggling to sell a lot of tickets. Like, this should have been one of the easiest markets to sell. Now, about 24 hours before today, either yesterday or sometime before, the ticket sales dropped. And the lowest price ticket was $20. When that happened, the numbers jumped up. And they were able to get a good 5,000 people in the Epic Center, which is good. Is it their best numbers? No. I was kind of looking at the card before the show. To be honest with you, well, I don't want to oversell the card. But you had Kenny Omega, you had Sting, you had some people on here that could have easily done a good 7,000, 8,000, probably 10. This is Kenny Omega's, when was the last time he had a singles match on TV? Very rare first time singles match on television. I think the last one was El Hijo del Vikingo, right? 5-star match. I could be wrong, but you got to see Kenny Omega in action. You had Penta Acero Miedo. It wasn't like it was a bunch of nobodies. And it's one of those things where people are going to look at me and say that I'm beating too hard. I'm beating too hard on AEW. You need to, understand that there are some hot and cold periods. Okay, you're right. This is clearly a cold period for AEW. Clearly. Again, people need to understand that when I say what I say and I come across critical or I nitpick or call out AEW for things that I don't like or I feel like doesn't make any sense, I'm not doing it so they can fail. Okay, this is different. This isn't me ranting on the WWE because their product sucks, because Vince McMahon was out of touch, and every single week my intelligence was insulted. That's not what this is. All right, that's not what I'm doing here with AEW. What I'm doing with AEW is this idea that they can be so much better than what they are, and they have the resources and the tools to make it better. Tonight's episode of Dynamite, for me, watching live, I wasn't watching at home with commentary, completely different experience. As a matter of fact, it should be better live, because you get to be in the atmosphere. By the time the show had ended, Dynamite, and I'm not talking about Rampage. By the time the show ended, my overall feeling of it was, And that's different. I remember when they came to Houston in 2021. The main event was Chris Jericho versus MJF. And we had to serenade Chris Jericho to the ring with his theme song without the music. One of the best moments in Dynamite history. That entire show was phenomenal. Great. 2021 was a great year for AEW, of course. The very next year, it was a Dynamite. Either it was right before Double or Nothing or before Double or Nothing that had CM Punk Hangman Page. It had the tournament, the Owen Hart tournament with Samoa Joe and Konosuke Takeshita, and the main event was Adam Cole versus Jeff Hardy. Like, come on. I had a great time with that show. And I was like, man, I can't wait for him to come back. This is the first show, when I left, I was like, all right. Now, I'm not going to complain. I got a good ticket for it. I'm happy I was there. I got into the show. And I'm the type of person, when I go to a wrestling show, I get into it. I sell what I'm seeing. I see a bad guy, I boo him. I see a good guy, I cheer. Someone goes to the top rope, does the 10 punches, I go 1, 2, 3, I count it. When someone hits the mat, I go, oh. When someone's getting pinned, 1, 2, oh. I get into all that. I love that. That's me showing the respect and the love for the performers. I can do all that while still come home and go, that show was all right. The show to me was serviceable. It was all right. Maybe it would have been different staying home and watching it. I just feel like it was a nice episode filled with good wrestling. Penta El Mieto. I hate saying that name. Pentagon Jr. That's what I'm used to calling him from Lucha Underground. Pentagon Jr. versus Jay White. Good match. Omega versus Kyle Fletcher. Good match. Hikaru Shida versus Emi Sakura. Really good match. These are good matches. The main event. Kind of wish they would have ended with Kenny Omega versus Kyle Fletcher. Would have felt more well-rounded, but I just feel like the problem with AEW now, and I'm being real with you, because this is coming from someone who was there. A lot of the people they have on television right now and the stories they're telling, are they competent? Yes. Are the wrestlers good inside the ring? Yes. Do the stories make sense? Yes. But they have no sizzle to them. There's no bite to it. It's just, the best way I can describe AEW right now, and the best word I can use, is filler. It feels like filler. Last week's episode had Swerve Strickland, Bryan they were going head-to-head with NXT, so of course, it felt a lot more important. You had Edge in the main event. You had Paige Saraya drop the bet to Hikaru Shida. You crowned a new AEW International Champion. So a lot happened last week. So that show, to me, again, I thought AEW had the better wrestling show last week, and NXT won because of the star power. But in terms of quality, show quality, AEW was the better show. But we already knew that NXT was going to win because that was their night, and AEW was on a different night than what they usually are. This week, I expect the ratings to be up. Hopefully, they'll be up. That show last week was more of what I was expecting this week. I didn't get that show this week. We got good wrestling with moderate storytelling, and the stories that they're working with right now, I just don't care about. I don't care about MJF versus the Bullet Club. I don't care. I don't care about seeing MJF versus Jay White. You know what I do care about? MJF versus Wardlow. They teased that. Wardlow came out and literally beat Ryan Nemeth with one powerbomb. And then afterwards, he showed MJF written on his wrist. And I tweeted on Twitter, I said, now that could be a main event for Full Gear, and I would be excited for that. Because there's a story there. There's a built-in story. They have a history. And ever since, Wardlow beat MJF, I've been kind of waiting on them to follow up on that. He's just been kind of floundering. He won a championship, great, but he hasn't really done much since then. This is the feud that we've been waiting for. They teased him and Kenny Omega. When he came face to face with Kenny Omega, that was the one that really highlighted to me that this feud with him and Jay White just ain't it. Because I'm like, you could be facing Kenny Omega. You could be facing Wardlow. You could be facing Samoa Joe again, and I would be fine with that. But you're fighting Jay White. Why? Why? Is Jay White competent? Yes. Does this storyline with him and MJF make sense? Sure. Fine. Will the match at Full Gear be a great match? I'm pretty sure it will be. I don't care. Because I know there's no way in hell Jay White is beating him for that championship. I have yet to believe that Jay White stands a goddamn chance of beating MJF for that title. It feels like filler. And it comes across as filler. This feud with Kenny Omega and the Don Callis family, you would think I'd be all over that. That feels like filler. I don't really care much about Kenny Omega versus Kenosuke or whatever henchman that Don Callis has him going up against. Powerhouse Hobbs, that interests me. I love what they did with him last week, having him absolutely destroy Chris Jericho. I want to see what they do with that. Now, that's a story I look forward to, but that wasn't the main focus of this episode. You know, these random matches that they're just throwing together. I feel bad for the women because it feels like they're getting less and less and less TV time. I just saw Raw put all kind of women, numerous stories. We're going from Raw having the main championship storyline involving Rhea Ripley, Nia Jax, Raquel Rodriguez, of course, Zoe Stark, and then Shayna Baszler. The mid-card NXT division, Becky Lynch, having all these feuds on 2 shows. The main show including Indy Hartwell, Xia Li, and they're teasing Jade Cargill, while we also have the women's tag team titles have a feud and storyline with Natalya and Tegan Nox going after those titles, and also the Kaden and Casey on the background. So you see that there's a division. There's divisions in the division. There are layers to this. And then you watch NXT and you see the same thing. You got multiple matches going on with different women. You have a tournament. You have a tag team feud here. JC Jane and Thea Hale and their stuff. And then you got the women's NXT women's title, which is Becky Lynch and whoever she's getting ready to face. You know, and you look at what's happening with AEW. Like Hikaru Shida. Okay. But what are we doing with the rest of the women? I just saw that Serena Deeb was backstage on Collision. You know, TBS Championship, you have Chris Statlander having matches, and the matches are really good, but what's the story? Where's the investment? All it is just matches. Everything feels like filler. And because of that, it's the reason why I think AEW is very cold right now. There were people that I was sitting next to at the event. And it's one of the biggest pet peeves I don't like. There are these people who buy these tickets who just sit on their hands. Now, I'm not saying you have to go to these shows and you have to get into it. You can get into it when you want to get into it. That's fine. It's your right. You buy a ticket. What I don't like about these particular type of people is that they come, they sit there, and they react to nothing. Nothing. Like, what are you doing here? And then they have the gall to look back at people like me, like I'm crazy because I'm getting into the show. And they're like, well, it's not that big of a deal. Why are you here? But in this instance, there were periods throughout the show where they were acting to nothing. I'm just like, well, you're not really giving these people a reason to react to your show. And as soon as Dynamite went off the air, they got up and left. remember a point in time with AEW where all their shows were must-see. Even the shows that were, quote-unquote filler, or just the standard shows where, all right, we'll just continue to build the storylines. You still watched it because you knew, all right, we were going to get some great wrestling on this show. It doesn't even feel like we're getting that anymore. It just kind of feels like we've hit a period with AEW where things just feel, they flatline. There's nothing compelling to it. There's no bite. Like, in all honesty, I feel like I can miss next week's episode and we'll be okay. Like, if I stopped reviewing AEW Dynamite until Full Gear, I don't think I would miss anything. Because nothing's happening. I shouldn't feel like that. I shouldn't feel the need to be okay to miss Dynamite. I haven't been watching Collision since CM Punk left. Since he got fired, I haven't watched a single episode of Collision. I watched some clips. I don't feel bad about it. And I think that's the problem. I think it's the problem now with AEW, where they're just going through the motions. You have stories that I'm interested in. I'm interested in seeing what Adam Copeland does with Christian. I want to see what they do with Swerve Strickland and Hangman Page, because that's compelling too. Of course, with Bryan Danielson and Zack Sabre Jr., we're going to continue that story. That's great. I want to see MJF versus Wardlow. I want to see MJF versus Kenny Omega. I want to see MJF versus Samoa Joe. There are opponents that can replace Adam Cole, who currently is out with injury. And I think also losing CM Punk, yes, that hurt. But what also hurt them was losing Adam Cole. Adam Cole being gone, I think, put an even bigger hole in the company and in the overall shows, because that was their main storyline. Their main feud was Adam Cole and MJF. Well, that's now in the back burner because Adam Cole got hurt. Unfortunately. He broke his ankle. He's got to get surgery. I saw Kevin Owens talk about, my friend Adam had his surgery and he's recovering from it. I don't know if he was talking about Adam Cole. Hopefully he was. But if he wasn't, okay. But he still needs to get surgery. And apparently, he needs more than one surgery. And if that's true, he's going to be out for a very long time. He's going to be out probably longer than we expected. And that sucks, because that was the driving force of Dynamite. Adam Cole and MJF. That's now gone. So now you need to have something to replace it. And now that we're not getting Adam Cole and MJF, which was sucky, it sucks. What's the whole point of those ROH tag team titles? Now everything that had weight lost weight. It's a series of unfortunate events that just make things not very fun, and it just make things feel like filler. And it sucks. Because I feel like, here's what I feel like. Imagine if they still had CM Punk and they still had Adam Cole. I feel like this show would have been so much more fun. Because I feel like we would have had a lot more storylines going into it. And then, of course, if they wasn't doing Adam Cole and MJF, they could have been doing CM Punk and MJF. Which is a feud we have yet to get to. I feel like if we had gotten to that feud, man, you couldn't get me to buy a ticket faster. So they're stuck in this down period where they have to find new ways to connect, new stories to tell. And you're doing it without the main storytellers. Like, I even thought about the lack of star power on the show. You didn't have Jon Moxley. You didn't have Bryan Danielson. You didn't have Keith Lee. You didn't have Swerve. You didn't have the Young Bucks. You didn't have a lot of the people that usually appear. You didn't have Jungle Boy Jack Perry. You didn't have Luchasaurus. Well, you did have Luchasaurus. He was on the show. You had Darby Allin on the show. But there used to be a time where it was jam-packed with major names. Thunder Rosa, Britt Baker. You had Sting. You had Kenny Omega. You had MJF. Those three are very strong house names. But then you have you have this other card filled with people like Emi Sakura and again Bullet Club Gold and all these other people who are trying to establish themselves, but they aren't house names. Nick Wayne is not a house name. Will it take time to establish them? Sure. But that time is not today. So, from a live experience standpoint, I went there to have a good time, and I made sure I had a good time. But for the fans that came out of it feeling like it was an okay show, it was serviceable, yeah, I agree. It wasn't a terrible show. I'm not going to say that. But it wasn't a show that left me going, God, I gotta come back next year. Nah, it was just a show, hey, you know what? I spent $40 on it. That's cool. AEW is cold right now. It's cold. Does that mean the show is a failure? No, it's not a failure. You're going to go through ebbs and flows. AEW right now is going through its ebb. It's hit a down period, and it's trying to find a way to get the momentum back. Hopefully it does. But it was lacking tonight. It was lacking. It was not the AEW quality episode I expected. I'm used to, you know? But, I went. I had a good time. Crowd was awesome. Crowd was the best part of the entire show. And, of course, Mystico and Rocky Romero. But that's just me. Let me know how it came across on TV. Maybe I would have had a better time sitting home and watching it. I don't know. But you came to watch my review. I gave you my thoughts. I thought the show was lacking. But it was still fun. It didn't meet the standard of AEW that I'm used to. The standard used to be a lot higher. It wasn't meeting that. And I'm going to call it out. Because it needs to be called out. You deserve to have that standard met. And so do the fans that spend money on it.